This is the Pixel, the brand new Google-designed smartphone that aims to be a showcase for the very best of what Android can offer. And this is the iPhone 7, the smaller of Apple's latest handsets and itself an exhibition of its manufacturer's new system software. Both of these have been exceptionally well-received handsets, and we wouldn't hesitate to recommend either. And while we spent some time highlighting what each can do individually, how do they stack up against each other? Do they still both look so hot, or will weaknesses begin to reveal themselves? I'm Stephen Shank with PhoneArena, getting to the bottom of that right now as I compare the Google Pixel against the Apple iPhone 7. Apple's been doing this flagship smartphone game for so long now that it's easy to expect greatness each year. Some years' upgrades may be more feature-packed than others, but we still know we're going to get one hell of a polished, really well-executed handset. And with the iPhone 7, we're absolutely not let down. Google, meanwhile, may have been backing Nexus phones for years now, but the Pixel's something special, with Google itself leading the design process in a way those Nexus phones couldn't touch. If Nexus phones were collaborations with some of the biggest names in Android hardware, Pixel is Google taking all that experience and stepping up to largely fly solo. In the end, Google cooked up a pair of Pixel phones, and right now we're looking at the smaller of the two, this 5.0-inch model. Compared to the 4.7-inch iPhone, the Pixel's a larger device in every regard, taller, wider, and thicker. The Pixel measures 8.5mm thick to the iPhone's 7.1mm build. The Pixel's also the heavier of the two phones, but not by a huge margin, tipping the scales at 143 grams compared to the 138-gram iPhone 7. Looking at the design of the Pixel, you almost get the sense that Google couldn't decide on one unified look for the phone. The back is half glass, half metal, and the sides transition from smooth curves to flat surfaces to angled bevels. In contrast, the iPhone is the picture of simplicity, with a solid slab of metal making up a near featureless back panel and edges that know exactly what they want to be: round, consistent curves. The refinement of the iPhone's design is hard to ignore, but the more time we spend with the Pixel, the more we like some of Google's decisions. Those multiple materials help provide tactile information when handling the phone, and while its edges are complicated, they really do feel pretty good in the hand, and that's important considering this handset's larger size. Both phones have some attractive screens, but in terms of both raw pixel count and pixel density, the Pixel has the advantage with its 1080 by 1920 441 pixel per inch AMOLED panel. The iPhone 7, meanwhile, retains its 750 by 1334 resolution for a density of 326 ppi. But while the Pixel may be objectively sharper, we really don't notice a big difference when actually using these two phones. Our bigger consideration concerns the output of those screens, and the iPhone 7's offers both better out-of-the-box color accuracy as well as higher overall brightness, and yes, we're considering both auto brightness modes and manual sliders. The Pixel just never gets quite as bright as the iPhone, hurting its usability in really sun-drenched outdoor conditions. As only befitting their position as exemplars for their respective platforms, both the iPhone 7 and the Pixel are some blazingly fast mobile hardware, each powered by some of the latest available silicon. For Apple, that means its new A-series processor, the A10 Fusion, which it pairs with 2GB of RAM for the iPhone 7. Google, meanwhile, helps introduce the Android world to Qualcomm's new Snapdragon chip, the 821. It's less of a leap forward than the A10 is, basically just a mildly faster Snapdragon 820, but that still means it offers some of the fastest processing around, and Google gives it access to a beefy 4 gigs of RAM. We've run plenty of synthetic benchmarks on both these phones, and while we could talk about the A10's killer single-core performance or how nice 3D graphics look on either, the important thing is how this power translates into the user experience. Both phones just breeze through their operating systems with smooth screen transitions, responsive app interactions, and performance just really indicative of two phones running some of the fastest chips around. It's nice to see a minimum of 32GB of storage on both the Pixel and the iPhone 7, and while we're upset that neither model supports microSD expansion, they each do offer some very high-capacity internal storage options, for a price. Here, Apple takes the cake with its hefty 256GB top spot, though the 128 gigs available for the Pixel should last users quite a while too. Android and iOS continue to be two very different beasts, but it's hard to deny that every year it feels like they share more and more in common. Like the screen color temperature correction for late-night usage. Apple may have its night shift and Google its night light, but you get the same functionality in the end. Both systems enjoy upgraded, more media-rich messaging capabilities, notifications with easy reply options, and improved device security. Not everything's up to parity though, and while Apple reserves its split-screen multitasking for larger iPads, Google's happy to let Android 7 Nougat split-screen mode loose upon smartphone users, and it works quite well on the Pixel. There's a big emphasis on voice assistance with both platforms, as Apple upgrades Siri with better third-party app support, and Google introduces its own overhauled voice system, the new Google Assistant. Both are really easy to access, either from the home button on these phones or via voice commands, even with the screen off, and they're capable of some impressive interactions. We plan on bringing you a detailed comparison soon, but suffice it to say that voice control on both phones is really well done, even with a few rough edges on the back and forth conversational replies that Google Assistant supports. Google's played with the idea of stereo speakers on its Nexus phones, but the Pixel family is a decidedly mono affair. And while the Pixel's single bottom edge mounted speaker sounds pretty alright, with a good range of bass and treble coverage, the iPhone 7 one-ups Google with a pair of stereo speakers for even more impressive sound. You may not realize that support's there to look at it, with the phone's front-facing earpiece joined by a bottom edge mounted speaker, and while the positioning sounds a little weird compared to a dual front-facing arrangement, it still sounds better than the Pixel. Where Apple succeeds with speakers, Google steps up with headphone support. Namely, it hasn't dropped its analog headphone jack in favor of a pure digital interface, or worse, having to carry around an adapter just to use your old headphones. That's not to say that Apple may not have a point with its decision to drop the headphone jack on the iPhone 7, but we'd still prefer to have one around all the same. You're probably not using your smartphone primarily to make voice calls anymore, but it's good to see both the iPhone 7 and Pixel not dropping the ball with strong voice performance. There's no one clear winner here, but the iPhones seem to do a little bit better in terms of clarity, with lower noise during calls. The Pixel has a substantially larger battery than the iPhone 7, but despite the apparent capacity gap, these handsets offer extremely comparable battery life in our screen-on, constant brightness custom tests. Both phones came in right around the 7.5-hour mark, though the Pixel pushed things just a few minutes further. The Pixel also recharges faster, topping off its battery in just 2 hours, while the iPhone takes another 20 minutes longer. Unfortunately, neither model supports wireless charging, but that sounds like a fantastic way for the next generation of one of these handsets to try to distinguish itself. Maybe the most contentious battle the Pixel and iPhone 7 will fight is in terms of camera prowess. Who shoots the better pictures? Both use 12-megapixel Sony sensors, but from there the hardware situation starts diverging. Apple with its optical stabilization, big aperture, and extra LEDs, while Google keeps hardware a little simpler while picking up some of the slack with its advanced processing tricks. We shot plenty of comparison pics under a variety of conditions, and, well, both cameras take some darn nice looking shots. Apple produces sharp, detailed images with the iPhone 7's camera, while Google wows us with complex, rich exposures from the Pixel's Auto HDR Plus mode. In the end, the winner will depend a lot on how you prefer your pictures to look, but either of these cameras is a great choice. That extends to their front-facers as well, and while low-light performance is a bit worse here, both selfie cams do an acceptable job. Video performance is another close race, with 4K and 1080p content looking great on both phones. Sometimes the Pixel's video can be a little dark, but its really quick refocus times and well-done electronic stabilization help make up for the occasional misstep there. Both phones sell for pricing that starts at about $650, with extra storage bumping things up from there. Apple offers a wider selection of color options than Google, but the Pixel's bold, really blue shade may be the best looking of the bunch, if only it were easier to come by. Then again, jet black doesn't look bad on the iPhone either. But while Google has quite a few retail partners for the Pixel and also sells the phone itself, Verizon's its exclusive carrier partner. The iPhone 7, meanwhile, is a lot easier to get your hands on through a cellular network, with all 4 big players carrying the handset in their stores. Apple and Google may seem like oil and water, and while they each have their own way of doing business, these two smartphones sure suggest their visions are beginning to converge. The Pixel and iPhone 7 may be very different handsets, but they sure have many capabilities and even a few design decisions in common. And with both doing so much so well, it's difficult to identify either as the clearly superior handset. In this case at least, personal preference reigns supreme. I'm Steven Shank with PhoneArena, thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any smartphone comparisons.